Hello, I'm Nico Fitz, and today we're doing phrase 3 of Jimmy Rosenberg Limehouse Blues. Let's have a look. We're doing a theory lesson today, so there's going to be no extra tab on my Patreon page. However, if you'd like to get the full tab of Jimmy's solo, it's on my Patreon along with all of my other tabs. So check that out at the links below if you want to get the full solo. Today we're going to be looking at what chords work over other chords. In this example, Jimmy is playing a long phrase over 4 different chords, over G, B7, E minor, and A7 in Limehouse Blues. But the passage itself, if you play it over just an E minor, so if you play E in the bass and you play the passage, you'll see that the entire phrase works over E minor as well. So here it is. Here's the phrase over E minor. The entire phrase, although he plays it over 4 different chords, G, B7, E minor, and A7, the entire phrase works also over E minor. So we have E minor phrases like this that sound like E minor 7. There's an E minor 7 sound. Then he comes down the E natural minor scale. And then it turns into the E harmonic minor scale. Then over the B7 chord, he's coming down an E minor arpeggio type pattern. Then over the E minor itself, he's playing up this E minor pattern as well. And the last chord is an A7. And he's playing again an E minor pattern, taking an E minor 7 and E minor 6. So over A. And all of these phrases work over E minor. So we're going to try to explain why this works, why they have so much in common, and how it works that you can play E minor material over different chords. Before we take a closer look at the notes, I'm going to put just above me here the letters E, G, B, D, F, A, C. And this is a very handy piece of music theory. I recommend learning this off. People have used different mnemonics to try and remember this series of letters. When I did classical music, it was Every Good Boy Deserves Fruit, and they had some other ones. But the best one that covers the whole phrase is Every Good Band Deserves Fans and Cash. E, G, B, D, F, A, C. I saw this on Ricky Komisky's video. He's a YouTuber. I'll put a link to his video down below. But it explains basically every good band deserves fans and cash. E, G, B, D, F, A, C. This is the easiest way to make chords and to compare different chords. So we'll get into that, but I'm going to leave this on screen to help us look at the different chords. Getting into the notes then, the first phrase by Jimmy Rosenberg is the easiest to decode here because he's playing what looks like an E minor 7 pattern. Could be regarded as E minor 7. He's playing it over G major. And this is because E minor is the relative minor of G major. In general, things that work over E minor or over E minor 7 should work over G, and things that work over G should work over E minor 7 because they're very, very similar. So we'll have a look with respect to the letters above us. We'll have a look at the 2 different chords and why they're so similar. So a G chord is made up of G, B, and D. So this is a G triad. If we take this G chord in open position that we all know, this is G, B, D, G, B, G. So the whole chord is just G's, B's, and D's, whereas E minor is E, G, and B. So if we look at this basic E minor in the open position, it's E, B, E, G, B, and E. We can see already that the 2 chords are quite similar. So G, B, and D is quite close to E, G, and B. They both have a G and a B in them. So what happens if we take this E minor chord, E, G, and B, and we add the D from G major? So we get E minor 7, E, G, B, and D. E minor 7 contains G, B, and D, which is a G major triad. So it contains a G chord within it. And what happens then if we take a G chord and add in an E? So we have G, B, and D, and we add in the other note from E minor 7, which is E. We add in the E here. We get G major 6. Basically, E minor 7 is the same as G major 6. They have the same notes, and usually it depends on what the bass is playing to decide whether it sounds like E minor 7 or G major 6. So anything that you play over E minor 7 should work over G major 6, and vice versa. Anything you play over G major 6 should work over E minor 7. So that's why in this example by Jimmy Rosenberg, we have this phrase that sounds good over both E minor 7 and over G. And over G. The next part of the phrase is a bit more difficult to explain. So we saw Jimmy playing what could be interpreted as an E minor 7 phrase over G major, so over G, and then coming down the E natural minor. And then at this point he grabs a note from the E harmonic minor. So that is a note of the next chord, which is B7. So he's going, again, he's doing an E minor 7 pattern over G major. Then down the E natural minor. Grabbing a bit of E harmonic minor. And then playing an E minor arpeggio pattern down over B7. When you play this E minor pattern over B7, it creates a kind of a B sus sound. So this kind of a chord. So Jimmy is playing this, and the bass, the rhythm player is playing this. So if it was in E minor, the notes would be the 9 of E, the root of E, the 5th of E, the minor 3rd, the 9 of E, and the root of E again. So that's the 9, the root, the 5th, the 3rd, the 9, and the root again. When we play the same phrase over B7, so when we play this phrase again, over B7, the notes take on a different context. So this is the 5th of B7, this is the sus4, this is the root of B7, this is the sharp 5, the 5, the 4, and back up to the 5. So it's kind of taking in a sus4 sound with a sharp 5. It's a little bit exotic, and the reason why it works, the reason why I think Jimmy got this idea, is because it sounds like a Phrygian dominant, which is where you play the harmonic minor scale over a 5-7 chord. So in this case, B7, and you play E minor harmonic minor over the B7. So I think that's why it works. I think that's how he arrived at the phrase. He basically was playing a Phrygian dominant kind of passage. Which is a kind of a sound of an E harmonic minor over a B7. So that's why that works. You can see that the notes, when you reinterpret them over a different chord, they kind of make sense. So we've got this B7 sus sharp 5 kind of sound. And this is also a technique of the Phrygian dominant, as I mentioned. So this is when you go from a 5 chord from this B7, you go up 4 steps, and you go to E minor, and then you play harmonic minor of that chord. So you're on B7, you go up 4 notes, and you go up to E minor, and you play the harmonic minor of this. And it should work over that B7. So far we've seen in the first phrase how an E minor 7 sounding pattern can be used over G and creates a kind of a G major 6 sound. We also saw how the natural minor could be used over G. It's really a part of the G major scale. They're basically the same scale. And how the harmonic minor, the E harmonic minor, can be played over a B7. So you go 4 notes up from the B7 and you play E harmonic minor. But most importantly of all, it works. It just sounds good as a phrase. And you can see that already just by studying this phrase closely, we've already got into some very interesting theory territory just by studying a couple of phrases. The next chord here is E minor. So he's playing an E minor pattern over E minor, appropriately enough. So when he gets up to the top of the phrase, we're now on A7. And he's again playing something that sounds very like E minor. So if you play it over E, you'll see what I mean. So when viewed over E minor, this is basically an E minor 7 passage that goes down to an E minor 6. So if you look at the notes over E minor, we have the 3rd of E minor, and then an enclosure around the root of E minor on the 12th fret of the high E string. So the 15th fret on the high E string is the 3rd of E minor, and then which is G, and then we have a enclosure around the root, which is E. Then down the E minor 7 arpeggio. Then up the E minor 6 arpeggio. And again at the top of the phrase, that's root 9, 3rd root of E minor. So the whole thing is emphasizing E minor and E minor 7 and E minor 6. Why then does it work over A7? This E minor 6, E minor 7, E minor pattern. So we'll have a look at the notes in the context of A7. We're playing up here around the 12th fret. So we're going to find an A7 chord up there on the 12th fret. So we have this A7 here, which is the same as the A7 in the open position, just moved up to the 12th fret. So if we look at it in the context of this chord, we can see that the first note is now the 7th of A, flat 7. And then there's an enclosure around the 5th, which is the 12th fret on the high E string, the E note. So now it's the 7th and the 5th of A7 being emphasized. We then go down what looks like this E minor 7 passage. So again, we're starting on the 7th of A, then doing an enclosure around the 5th of A, then going down what before was looking like an E minor 7 passage, and then up down to an E minor 6 and coming back up. Over A, the notes look different, so they look like the sus4 of A, they look like the 9 of A, the 7 of A, and the 5th of A. And in the original phrase, the E minor phrase, we go down to E minor 6. And over A again, this sounds different. So this sounds like the 3rd of A. So basically what you have is an A7, an enclosure around the 5th of A, then a kind of a A7 sus pattern, and then resolving to the 3rd of A. And back up to a kind of an A7 pattern at the top. So just again in total over A. It's kind of an A7 sus4 that resolves to the 3rd down here. Just to contrast this to the same phrase over E minor as we did originally. Now have a listen to the difference over A and over E minor. To recap then, in just this short phrase we've seen that we can use the relative minor over the relative major if we play E minor 7, for example, over G major, the relative major, it will give us a G major 6 sound. And it's very useful to do something to experiment with if you have phrases in E minor 7 or any minor 7 phrase, playing it over the relative major and experimenting with that. We've also seen how we can use the harmonic minor scale to create a Phrygian dominant sound over a dominant chord. So in this example, we have B7. We go up 4 notes of the scale. And we have E minor. So you play E harmonic minor over the B7. And it creates this Phrygian dominant. We also looked at how to use E minor over A7. And it's worth looking at the relationship between the notes there. So E is 5 scale notes above A. So A, B, C, D, E. And this relationship should hold everywhere on the guitar. So let's say we were trying to play over E7. We would go up 5 notes of the scale, E, F, G, A, B. So we're going to play B, and then we would play the same phrase. So we can turn a B minor phrase into an E7 phrase. We can see that there's a lot packed in there into just one short phrase in terms of learning theory and improv ideas. So this is the way I recommend going about learning theory. Learn specific material, learn material by great musicians, and then try to analyze the material, try to get into it, and try to apply it to other situations. That's all from me today, and I hope you enjoyed the video. And next time we'll be getting back to more practical examples, and I'll be uploading more tabs where you can download them from my Patreon page. So until next time, see ya.